breakfast the next morning, Elizabeth felt nervous. Stephen and the twins had gone to bed before their parents came home from dinner, so no one knew how the Wakefields would react when they saw Stephen's black eye. Hoping her mother and father wouldn't be so mad at Anthony Rizzo that they'd be angry at Sophia, Elizabeth waited for her brother to come downstairs to the kitchen table. Like Jessica, he was never cheerful in the morning. Sometimes he skipped breakfast altogether. It looked as if today would be one of those times. Even Jessica appeared and picked at her cereal. Still, Stephen remained upstairs. Between spoonfuls, her twin gave Elizabeth smug grins and kept whispering, "Just wait. Wait till he find out." But Elizabeth couldn't wait. She had promised to meet Julie and Amy before school to fill them in on the previous day's committee meeting. "I'll bet," she whispered to her sister as she scooped her books up from the counter, "I won't miss a thing. I'm sure you'll fill me in on all the details anyway." Elizabeth knew Jessica wouldn't miss Stephen's grand entrance for anything. She kissed her parents and started out of the kitchen, then looked back to see her twin rooted to her chair, waiting with the same "I told you so" look she had worn the night before. At school, though, the excitement of the show soon made her forget about Stephen. Everyone wanted to find out more about the play, and Elizabeth hardly had a minute to herself until lunchtime. And, although Jessica called over to her as she and Amy walked by the cafeteria, Elizabeth could only wave back and hurry outside with her best friend. On top of everything else, today was the day of their picnic with Sophia, and she didn't want to miss the fun of sharing a secret lunch. Sure enough, Julie, Brooke, and Sophia were waiting for them at the back door of the gym. The 5 girls couldn't help giggling. All of them were loaded down with picnic supplies. Each carried a paper bag, while Sophia hugged a giant thermos and a package of paper cups. "Who said getting out of eating school food was easy?" Brooke joked, leading the way toward a tool shed that stood near a huge elm tree behind the school. Sophia, looking as happy as if she'd been invited to a royal ball, followed the others until at last they stood under the arching branches of the elm. "You see how perfect it is?" Elizabeth asked her. "The tool shed hides us from sight, and we can pretend that school doesn't even exist." Sophia looked around the cool green nook under the tree. "It's too good to be true," she said, her eyes wide with pleasure. She set the thermos on the ground and unwrapped the cups. "I'd like to propose a toast," Julie announced as soon as the cups were filled and each girl had taken one. "Great," said Amy, her long blonde hair curling a little in the gentle wind. "What shall we drink to? The play? I just know it's going to be terrific." "No," answered Julie. "Let's drink to the first official picnic of the anti-cafeteria lunch group." "But not the last," added Brooke, raising her cup. "I think we should sneak away like this every week, all of us." Sophia's eyes were filled with pleasure as she sipped her punch and watched the other girls. She stood very close to Elizabeth as if she thought her new friend might suddenly vanish into thin air. "Terrific idea, Brooke," Elizabeth declared. "Let's make Thursday our regular picnic day, okay?" "Me too?" Sophia asked hopefully. "Of course, Sophia," Amy told her. "You're a member of our group." Soon all 5 were sitting comfortably under the tree, with a large flowered sheet spread between them. "I just hate to eat without a tablecloth," admitted Julie, who had spirited the sheet from her mother's linen closet. Next, the feast was set out. Sandwiches, pickles, cold pizza, potato salad, and for dessert, fruit and cookies. "This feels like a birthday party," exclaimed Brooke. "It's hard to believe we could be having so much fun so close to school." "Well, we still have a long time until a real birthday party," observed Julie. "I think Amy's is next, and that's still months away." She stopped and looked at Sophia questioningly. "Unless, of course, your birthday is sooner, Sophia. I know everybody's birthday except yours." "Oh, mine's coming up next month," Sophia told her. But instead of looking happy at the prospect of a birthday, Sophia seemed suddenly depressed. It was as if a shadow fell across her face. "Birthdays only come once a year," she said, sounding more cheerful. "But this picnic can happen any time we want. Why, we can almost make school disappear just by meeting here." Her dark eyes glowed with new sparkle and mischief. In fact, when I lie back in the grass like this, I don't even remember how to diagram a sentence. Hey, said Brooke, leaning back beside Sophia and staring up at the sky. You're right. Why, I've even forgotten who Miss Weiler is. The others tried too, sprawling on their backs and watching the branches of the elm tree trace patterns against the clouds. What does the hairnet look like? Said Elizabeth, giggling as she thought about Mrs. Arnett. I've forgotten her face. And her social studies class, too, said Julie. She leaped up and brushed crumbs from her skirt. I'm afraid that's the bell. Everyone stopped and listened. Sure enough, in the distance, they heard the bell ringing. Gosh, complained Amy, why is lunch period always so short? She stood up and collected pieces of paper and stray cups from their tablecloth. I guess we better go back inside. I hate to leave, Sophia said sadly. We had so much fun here. Don't worry, Elizabeth reminded her. You're an official member of the anti-cafeteria lunch group now. That means you've got a date here once a week, right? The second bell rang, and the little group packed up quickly and raced back toward the school. Just as they opened the gym door, Sophia touched Elizabeth's arm and whispered, Thanks for the nicest school lunch I've ever had. Then she laughed, brushing at her moist eyes. It really did feel like a birthday party, I think. What do you mean you think, Sophia? Elizabeth asked. Haven't you ever had a birthday party? Sophia's curly dark hair framed her blushing face. Not really, she admitted. You see, Mom has never been able to give a party for me. Besides, even if I gave it myself, no one would come. She studied the ground, unable to meet Elizabeth's eyes. That note from the unicorns wasn't the first, Elizabeth. Ever since I've been old enough to go to school, I've been getting notes like that from kids. With a tremendous effort, she finally raised her eyes and looked at her new friend. That's why today was so special. Elizabeth was used to elaborate parties with balloons and music and lots of presents. It was hard for her to imagine that Sophia had never once known what it was like to have a real birthday celebration. If you think I'm going to let your birthday pass without an honest-to-goodness party, Elizabeth declared, you don't know me very well, Sophia. But I didn't mean, don't you dare say a word. Just meet me in front of the office after school. She grabbed her friend's wrist and made Sophia look at her. Promise? Sophia's eyes dropped. All right, she whispered, so low that Elizabeth could barely hear her. Elizabeth was full of plans. By the end of the day, she could hardly wait to find out exactly when Sophia's birthday was. But before she could keep her appointment with her friend, Jessica rushed over to her. I've got to tell you what Mom and Dad told Stephen, Jessica insisted. It can wait, Elizabeth told her sister firmly. I have to talk with Sophia after school. It's important. Jess, you and I can talk as soon as I get home, okay? Jessica's blue-green eyes narrowed. You mean you're choosing that disgusting creature over your own flesh and blood? Her voice rose, and she pointed a finger right in Elizabeth's face. Don't say I didn't tell you, Elizabeth. Believe me, you'll break Mom's and Dad's hearts if you keep hanging out with that tacky family. Elizabeth watched her sister stamp angrily down the hall toward the front steps of the school. Just as Jessica was storming down the stairs, Sophia started up them. Elizabeth watched in dismay as her sister and her friend passed each other without a word. Sophia tried to smile when she saw Jessica, but Jessica brushed angrily by her. At the bottom of the stairs, she turned back toward Elizabeth. As long as you're going to be talking to Hot Finger's sister, she announced loudly, you might as well tell her to try putting on a play with no one in it. Elizabeth and Sophia stared as Jessica disappeared from view. What did she mean? Asked Sophia. From her confused expression, it was clear she had no idea what had happened between her brother and Stephen the day before. We'll talk about that later, Elizabeth told her as they left the building. Right now, we have some important planning to do. Let's walk home, and I'll tell you about your party on the way. My party? Sure, we're going to throw you the biggest, best birthday party ever at my house. Sophia stopped in the middle of the sidewalk to stare at her friend. Oh, Elizabeth, do you really mean it? Gee, everybody would come to a party at your house? She blushed. Even if it was for me? So when's the date? Elizabeth was already excited at the prospect of giving Sophia her first birthday party. I just hope it's not before the play. No, thank goodness. It's the day after our Friday performance. Terrific. We'll have 2 raisins to celebrate on Saturday. We'll invite the whole cast. We'll invite everybody." Sophia looked happy, but a little worry line creased her brow. "It sounds like a dream," she sighed. "But could we keep it small? Just the people you think might really like to come?" "Of course," Elizabeth declared. "But remember, you'll be a famous playwright by then, and everyone will be dying for invitations." Both girls laughed, but Elizabeth was serious about her belief in Sophia. "I mean it, Sophia," she said. "If the story you've started turns out to be half as good as I think, a lot of things will change for you at school." "Of course," she added, "there's a lot of work to do." All the way to Sophia's house, they talked about the play. They discussed characters they thought should be added to Sophia's stage family. Sophia's story was missing a father, and Elizabeth had insisted that their play needed one. "When Dad's away on a trip," she explained, "we all miss him like crazy, especially Stephen." "I know what you mean," Sophia agreed, sadness returning to her voice. "Before my father left, Tony was happy and good. Mama never had any trouble with him, and I always had someone special I could talk things over with." She stopped at the door to her house, putting one finger over her mouth. "We'd better not talk about this anymore, Elizabeth. Not around Mama. It makes her sad to remember how Tony used to be." Elizabeth had wondered earlier if she should tell Sophia about what her brother had done to Stephen. Now, ushered into her friend's kitchen for an after-school snack, she decided not to mention the fight yet. The two girls had been in Sophia's room for over an hour when they heard Mrs. Rizzo open the front door. "Tony," they heard her say, "you're home early." Maybe it was the memory of Stephen's bruised eye, or all the rumors she'd heard. Whatever the reason, Elizabeth was not anxious to meet Anthony Rizzo. I have to go home now. It's getting late," she told Sophia. "We'll finish tomorrow after the committee meeting." Hurriedly, she gathered her books and headed for the front door, just as a tall boy walked into the living room. Elizabeth had seen Tony Rizzo only once before, but she recognized him immediately. He had brown eyes like his sister's, but his face was sullen and sharp. Tony stepped back a bit when he saw Elizabeth, and his angular, dark-skinned face took on a guarded look. "Tony," Sophia told him, "this is my friend Elizabeth. Elizabeth, my brother Tony." She stood back, smiling shyly, as if she hoped they would like each other on sight. But, as Tony Rizzo grudgingly held out his hand, Elizabeth felt a rush of confusion and anger. The boy standing before her was her new friend's brother, yet the hand she was shaking was probably the same one he'd hit her brother with. Was Jessica right? Would it break her parents' hearts to know she was here? Turning toward the door, Elizabeth stammered in embarrassment. I really have to go, Sophia. I have a lot of homework. See you tomorrow." Her cheeks burning, she bolted out the door and down the Rizzo's walk. It wasn't until she got to her own street that she stopped running and started thinking. Could she be making the same mistake about Tony that everyone at school had made about his sister? Maybe there was just an ordinary person somewhere under that rough manner. Maybe a little kindness would bring back the loving brother who used to help Sophia before their father left. Maybe, she told herself as she reached her front door, she would discuss this with Sophia tomorrow. They could talk everything over and get it all straight. And that was exactly what Mr. Wakefield said as soon as Elizabeth had dropped her books on the kitchen counter. "There's something we have to talk about," he said, pulling out a chair for her at the table. Mrs. Wakefield sat beside him. Both her parents looked serious. "Is this really a conference?" she asked nervously. "Shouldn't we get Stephen and Jessica?" "No," Mr. Wakefield said quietly. "We've already talked with them. In fact, it was your sister who told us you have a particular interest in the Rizzo's family." Elizabeth had been dreading this moment. Now she was so anxious to convince her mother and father that Sophia was a wonderful, talented girl that everything came out at once. She told them about the work her friend had done on the Sixers, about the wonderful plays she'd written, about Mrs. Rizzo's bad leg. As Elizabeth tried to tell them how she felt about her friend, her father folded his hands and finally interrupted her in a quiet, forceful voice. It was the voice his children called his courtroom voice. It meant that everyone else listened. "Your mother and I have made a decision, honey. We're going to ask you to stop seeing Sophia outside of school. Jessica tells us you spent quite a lot of time at her house." "But, Mom, Dad, Sophia shouldn't be punished for what her brother did." "It's not a question of punishing," Mrs. Wakefield declared. "It's a question of protecting you." "That's right, Elizabeth," her father continued. "You know I don't deal with juvenile criminal cases, but Tom Bradford in our office does. He handled the Rizzo case when the boy was brought up on burglary charges 2 years ago. From what he says, that young man has some serious problems. But, Daddy, Elizabeth couldn't believe her ears. Her parents had always told her not to listen to rumors and to make her own decisions about people. How could they ask her not to see a girl who'd been in their house only once? You don't even know Sophia. Mr. Wakefield put his hand on Elizabeth's shoulder. Tony Rizzo is trouble, and his home isn't the sort of place where we want to see our daughter. We're not telling you that you can't speak to Sophia or see her in school. We're merely asking that you don't socialize with her outside of school. Elizabeth tried to interrupt again, to tell them about Mrs. Rizzo's warm, neat house, about how much she cared about both of her children, but Mr. Wakefield raised his hand. I'm afraid this decision isn't open to debate, Elizabeth. I've looked at the court records and I've seen your brother's face. That is quite enough to convince me we're better off keeping our distance from the Rizzos. All of them. Elizabeth sank into her chair, feeling tears sting her eyes. She knew from the sound of her father's voice that no arguments, tears, or pleas would change things. It meant that her birthday party for Sophia would have to be canceled, and tomorrow she would have to give her friend an excuse for not visiting her anymore. Chapter 7. Jessica poked her head into her sister's room, anxious to learn how Elizabeth's discussion with their parents had gone. She found Elizabeth stretched full length on her blue corduroy bedspread. You look like someone just died, said Jessica. Elizabeth didn't feel like talking to anyone, especially Jessica. She was probably the one who had convinced her parents that Sophia was a bad influence. Look, Jessica, you got things just the way you wanted them, so don't pretend to be sorry now. For your information, big sister, Jessica assured her twin, I did my best to help. Without being invited, she sat beside Elizabeth on the bed, moving her twin's feet to make room. I told Mom and Dad that you just don't know any better than to trust everyone, even hardened criminals. Wow, that's great. Thanks for the favor. Is there anything else you want to do for me? Elizabeth rolled over to look at her twin. Do you really think that, Jess? Do you really think I'm wrong about Sophia? Jessica hugged Elizabeth. Don't you see, silly? I'm not worried about Sophia. I just care about you. If someone's going to save Sophia, let it be anybody else. Why should you be the one? But if everyone feels that way, then no one will ever give her a chance, even people as terrific as Mom and Dad. Well, I'm glad they've put the Rizzo place off limits. I don't want my only twin spending all her free time with the creepiest family in Sweet Valley. Jessica glanced at her sister. Now, do you forgive me or not? Her smile was mischievous and irresistible. If you do, I've got some good news about your trip to L.A. Okay, Jess. Elizabeth sighed and hugged her sister. Let's call a truce. She hated it when they were mad at each other, and she knew it was impossible to hold a grudge against Jessica. What's up? In all the excitement over our school play, I'd almost forgotten about Shout. How could you? Jessica declared, shocked. How could you think some embarrassing sob story written by that person could be more important than the greatest show ever created, Liz? She shook her blonde head. Sometimes I think you and I live on different planets. Then, smiling, she slipped a piece of paper into Elizabeth's hand. What's this? Elizabeth unrolled a lined sheet covered with Jessica's big, careless handwriting. It's a fan letter to Terrence Wesley, the actor who plays Holt. Since I won't be able to go, and since Dad says you'll be going backstage, I want you to give it to him. When Elizabeth began to read the letter, Jessica became embarrassed. Oh, Liz, you're not supposed to read that. It's personal. It's silly, I guess, but I just wanted him to know how absolutely perfect he is. You mean we're actually going to talk to the cast? Elizabeth couldn't believe her ears. Mr. Martin must be a real VIP. Elizabeth carefully folded the letter and put it on her table. Of course I'll give him your note, and I'll tell him it comes from his biggest fan. She genuinely wished her twin could give her letter to the star herself. After all, no one cared more about the show than Jessica. And if you don't tell me exactly what color his eyes are, Elizabeth Wakefield, I'll never forgive you. I want you to pay attention to every detail. I want to know absolutely everything. How he walks, how he talks, how he shakes hands. Elizabeth laughed. Maybe I should just take a video camera into his dressing room. I'm serious, Liz. I expect a full report. Jessica stood up and then walked toward her room. I'm just glad that awful play of Sophia's will be over the day before, so you can concentrate on the really important show. The day before? You mean the trip is a Saturday after our play? Of course, silly. Don't you have it marked on your calendar? Suddenly she frowned, remembering how all her plans had gone wrong. First I circled the day of the play, but now I'm not going to try out after all. Then I circled our trip, hoping Mom and Dad would let me go, but now that's off. I just hope the mini Olympics don't fall through too. Elizabeth felt terrible. She was scheduled to go to Los Angeles on Sophia's birthday. How could she have forgotten? Things were worse than ever. Slumped on her bed, she only half listened to Jessica's chatter about her brand new scheme. Since I wouldn't be caught dead in that gross play, I decided to concentrate on getting chosen chairman of the Mini Olympics. The Mini Olympics was an annual day-long festival of races and games that the 6th grade helped organize. That's great, Jess, Elizabeth told her twin, but if I don't get this homework done, you'll have to change all your plans to attend my funeral. I can take a hint. Jessica left, shutting the bathroom door behind her, and Elizabeth tried to get back to work. But after she'd read the same paragraph in her social studies book 3 times, she closed the cover. Why had things worked out so badly? Why couldn't her parents understand how much more Jessica wanted to go to Los Angeles than she did? Now that she knew the trip was scheduled for Sophia's birthday, she would give almost anything to stay home. After all, Mom and Dad were going on the boat trip that day, so if Elizabeth were home, she could at least spend some time with Sophia. She could show her that someone really did care. The next morning at breakfast, Elizabeth decided to make one more try. Mom, she asked, couldn't Jessica please take my place on the trip? You know she's the one who deserves to go. Elizabeth, I thought we'd already settled this. This trip isn't a prize to the best twin or even the person who most wants to go. Her mother glanced briefly at their father, as if looking for support. Your mother's right, Mr. Wakefield responded. The Martins have room for only one guest. It's a lucky chance that the ticket became available, and we all agreed that luck would decide who went. He looked at Jessica, who, her breakfast untouched, had been holding her breath in the hope that her sister's plea would succeed. When this family makes a decision together, we all have to abide by it, Jessica. I'm sure you and Stephen can find something fun to do while your mother and I are away. Jessica's face collapsed into a frown that made it plain spending the day with her brother was not her idea of a good time. Stephen spoke up. Sorry to break your heart, sister dear, he told her, but I've got a date with a basketball. The coaches have invited the team to a postseason game and party that day. Even if we don't win this weekend, Coach Horner says he wants to thank us for a great effort. And if we do win, he's going to throw the biggest victory celebration ever, so it looks as though you'll be home alone. All during school the next day, Elizabeth wondered how she was going to avoid going to Sophia's house that afternoon. The two had planned to discuss the play after the second committee meeting. The worst part of all was having to hide the truth. She couldn't tell Sophia what her parents had done. They walked back to Sophia's house after school. As Sophia led the way to the door, Elizabeth said, Gee, I'd like to come in, Sophia, hoping she didn't look as uncomfortable as she felt. But I've got this funny feeling in my stomach. She searched her friend's face to see if she suspected anything. And my throat feels kind of itchy. Gosh, that's too bad, Elizabeth, said Sophia, concerned. You seemed fine at our meeting. Why don't you go home now? Maybe, if you feel better later on, you could sketch out some dialogue for the second scene. Only if you promise to give it your special finishing touch. I can never make the characters as real as you do. I'll call you soon, okay? At least no one could stop her from talking to Sophia on the phone, she thought miserably. Great! Sophia, turning up her driveway, smiled and waved. And don't forget, she added, we still have to plan our guest list. I don't know which I'm looking forward to more, our play or our party. The heavy, guilty feeling grew so strong that by the time she reached home, Elizabeth thought she might really be sick. Even Stephen noticed her mood. Hey, mistress of gloom, he greeted her from beside the refrigerator. Why so low? Although she wanted to tell someone how horrible it made her feel to listen to Sophia talk about the birthday party, there was no one to confide in. Stephen, whose black eye had turned a sickly yellow, was the last person who would understand. I don't know, she told her brother. I guess I wish Jessica could go to L.A. in my place. Elizabeth doubted there was any solution to her problems, but she was open to suggestions. Okay, big brother, do you have any answers? Simple, Stephen smiled, wrinkling the yellow skin under his right eye. The old switcheroo. What? You know, change places. You be Jessica and Jessica will be you. After all, you do look exactly alike, and it wouldn't be so tough to pull the wool over the Martins' eyes for 2 days. After all, they've never even met you two. Besides, it's all in a good cause. Stephen stood up, his plate clean, and grabbed his basketball jersey from a hook on the kitchen door. If we have to keep listening to Jessica whine and carry on about that darn show, the whole family's going to go nuts. Even after Stephen had gone upstairs and she heard the loud beat of his stereo through the ceiling, Elizabeth continued to sit quietly in the kitchen. While Jessica always enjoyed switches and intrigue, Elizabeth disliked doing things behind her parents' backs. Still, her brother's suggestion did seem like the way to make everyone happy, even Sophia. With the family away for the weekend, maybe she could have a small party for her friend. She'd invite only a few good friends, and it could stay a secret. A special secret for a special girl. There was one problem, of course, and Elizabeth decided to face it right away. If Jessica wasn't willing to go along with the switch, it was no use planning Sophia's party. As she hurried upstairs and knocked on her twin's bedroom door, she realized she mustn't mention the birthday party. If Jessica thought she was helping Sophia by going to Los Angeles, she might even be willing to give up seeing her favorite show. "Come on in," Jessica called. "You're just the grammar expert I need to see." Jessica was lying across the foot of her bed, surrounded by 2 apples, a bag of potato chips, and an English book. "How do you diagram a preposition, anyway?" "Oh, Jess, you're not going to ask me to do your English assignment, are you?" With a huge grin and round, innocent eyes, Jessica looked up at her twin. "Now, Liz," she said in a voice like honey, "would I do a thing like that?" Then, her grin spreading, she added, "But come on in and let's have a sister-to-sister talk." Elizabeth, sitting on her twin's bed and kicking off her shoes, wondered what else, besides an English assignment, Jessica's trip to Los Angeles was going to cost her. Chapter 8. What? You want to switch places? Jessica was so surprised she forgot all about getting Elizabeth to help with her homework. Although she was always full of sneaky schemes, her truthful sister was the last person Jessica expected to suggest such a plan. "Weren't you the one who gave me that goody-goody lecture after our triplet trick fizzled?" "But this time is different, Jess," Elizabeth insisted. "It's not as if we'd be hurting anyone else. In fact," she added to herself, "we'd be helping someone who wants a birthday party just as badly as you want to see Shout. Mom and Dad are leaving for their boat party first thing in the morning, and the Martins won't pick you up until noon. Everything will work perfectly." "What about our blabbermouth brother?" asked Jessica, making room for her sister beside her on the bed. "Stephen isn't exactly famous for keeping secrets." "This whole thing was his idea. Believe me, Jess, he wants to see you happy just as much as I do." Jessica tossed aside her English book. Interested. "Now, sometimes that jerk makes me think he's an actual human being," she admitted, a twinkle in her eyes. Suddenly, though, her eyes narrowed. "Wait a minute, Liz. Stephen wasn't even invited, so he doesn't lose anything if I go to Los Angeles. But what about you? I know you're the best sister ever, but still, why would you give up such a neat trip to the city? After all, you won it fair and square." "Oh, it's not that I don't want to go," Elizabeth assured her twin. "It's just that you want to go more." She glanced at Jessica, who still looked suspicious. "Besides," she added, reaching for a potato chip, "I'll still be unwinding from the excitement of Friday night. Don't forget, that's the opening night of our big play. Your big play, maybe, not mine, and not anybody else's, if I have anything to say about it." Jessica folded her arms and glowered. "I'm not going to auditions next week, and I'll bet not a single unicorn will try out either." "Jessica Wakefield, don't you dare spoil this play. It's going to be the best thing the school has ever done. You've got just the talent we need to make the show a success. Why not at least read it before you make up your mind?" Elizabeth scrambled off her sister's bed and started out the room. "I've got some scenes on my desk. I know if you read them, you'll see what I mean." But before her twin had reached the bathroom that connected their rooms, Jessica was calling her back. Don't bother, Liz. I won't read a word of that disgusting girl's play, and I won't make a fool of myself by being in it. Jessica looked so angry and determined that Elizabeth gave up and returned to the bed. All right, Jess, suit yourself, but please don't make up everybody else's mind. Maybe some of your friends would feel different if they came to auditions and listened to our play. Are you serious, Liz? If you think anybody would want to be involved with that shabby Sophia or her stupid play, you're dead wrong. Why, there's not even going to be singing or dancing. It's going to be too embarrassing to even watch. In fact, the unicorns have already decided not to go. No, Jessica, you don't mean it. You can't. I can and I do. If that play ends up with no cast and no audience, you won't see me crying. Elizabeth knew Jessica could be hasty and hurtful sometimes, but she never dreamed her twin would go to such lengths to snub someone who'd never harmed her. Jessica, I've met Tony Rizzo, and even though I can hardly believe he's related to someone as sweet as Sophia, that could never make me stop liking her. You've got to give her a chance, she pleaded. Like the one that her brother gave Stephen? No way, Jessica cried. She got up from her bed and walked toward Elizabeth's closet. She stood by the door, scanning its contents. Now, let's talk about something more pleasant, like what you are going to wear to shout. Elizabeth watched her sister pick through her best dresses and skirts. If she was going to get out of Los Angeles, she knew that now was not the time to try to talk Jessica out of her campaign against Sophia. After Jessica had selected 2 dresses, a scarf, and a gold necklace, she joined her sister for a cram course in sentence diagramming. The twins spent the next 45 minutes working. Although she fidgeted and squirmed, Jessica was a quick learner. The next morning she surprised both Elizabeth and Mr. Bowman by being the first in class to finish one of his pop quizzes. I'm impressed, Elizabeth whispered as the bell rang. I didn't know you were such a whiz at English. It's easy when you've got a good teacher. Jessica winked at her sister and gathered up her books. See you later, Liz. I've got a rush unicorn meeting. I hope you all don't get stiff necks from holding your noses up in the air, Elizabeth teased. I heard that, Elizabeth Wakefield. Leila Fowler joined the two as they left the room. She was wearing a yellow jumper with a coordinated print blouse. Her hair looked as perfect as everything else about her. For your information, the unicorns don't turn up their noses at anyone unless they're second rate. The smile she beamed at Elizabeth was as cold as it was pretty. It's just that all the first-rate people are already unicorns. Except for one, of course. Jessica hugged her twin affectionately. Even though she knew Elizabeth could never enjoy the kind of gossip and intrigues the unicorns loved, her sister was still her favorite person. She dumped her books in Elizabeth's already loaded arms, then waved gaily. Since you're going that way, Liz, would you throw my books in your locker? I'll pick them up after lunch. Without another word, she grabbed Leila's arm and rushed off down the hall. As the 2 girls raced away from Elizabeth, a 3rd student raced toward her. Smiling and waving, Sophia was so anxious to get Elizabeth's attention that she didn't watch where she was running. In horror, Elizabeth watched as Leila and Jessica collided head-on with Sophia. Leila's books and the armload of paper Sophia had been carrying went sailing as all 3 girls tumbled to the floor. I might have known, Leila said when she saw who'd run into them. Her face was calm, but there was no mistaking the sarcastic tone in her voice. Here, let me help you up, Sophia. We wouldn't want to spoil that designer gown, would we? Too stunned to be hurt by the cruel remark about her simple dress, Sophia let Leila pull her to a standing position. Then she stooped down and began retrieving the papers one by one. Before she could reach the last page, Jessica grabbed it and waved it in front of her fellow unicorn. Oh, what have we here, Leila? Jessica asked. Look at this, everyone, Jessica shouted. We've been bowled over by the school play, knocked down by the biggest talent in Sweet Valley, maybe even the world. While Sophia reached frantically for the page, Jessica continued to wave it around. Soon a crowd of curious students gathered around them. Suddenly, Leila grabbed the sheet of paper from Jessica, held it in front of her, and announced grandly, And now, I think we should sample a bit of this great play we've all heard so much about. I'll just audition right now. One boy laughed loudly, and someone else applauded as Leila started speaking in a ridiculously dramatic voice. Mom, she read, I couldn't tell you how I felt before. She rolled her eyes and put one hand on her chest. "Have you ever heard such meaningful dialogue?" she asked the crowd around her. "I think my heart is breaking." She looked once more at the page she held and began reading again. "Sometimes being a kid is the hardest job of all." Now she fell to the floor as if she'd been shot. "Oh, the power of feeling here," she groaned. "I can't stand to go on." Her eyes still rolling, she lay on the floor as if she'd fainted. Leela's hand fell to the floor, and the paper she'd been reading fluttered out of it. Sophia, tears of humiliation streaming down her face, scrambled to pick it up. Then, without a word, she ran down the hall, clutching the crumpled sheets of the play. Elizabeth tried to stop her, but the girl streaked past as if she were running in a race. Leela wasn't finished. She loved being the center of attention, and more than a dozen people were clustered around her, giggling and talking. Slowly she sat up, then stood to more applause. Thank you, thank you. I know none of us can wait to hear more of that tragic story. I mean, who needs a fun musical with great dancing and singing when we can have one of Sophia Rizzo's tragedies?" Elizabeth watched helplessly as Sophia's hard work was spoiled with a few cruel words. She had hoped Jessica might try to stop Leela's thoughtless antics, but her sister almost never crossed Leela, and she would never take sides with Sophia. It wasn't hard to find Sophia. Seated alone at the table in Mr. Bowman's classroom, Sophia was crying, her small round face buried in her hands. When Elizabeth touched her shoulder, Sophia looked up with an expression that would have broken anyone's heart. "It's over," she sobbed. "The play's over before it began." "It is not," Elizabeth told her firmly. "You'll see. We don't need the same old people who keep trying out year after year. We'll use people who don't usually get the chance, kids more like the ones in the play." "But everyone will hate it. They were all laughing. Didn't you hear them?" Sophia was choking, and her words came in spurts from crying so hard. "Everyone always laughs at me. They laugh at my clothes. They laugh at my house. They laugh at Tony, too, even though he tries to scare them all." She made an effort to stop sobbing and look steadily at Elizabeth. "I think that's why Tony changed, just to stop them from laughing. He thinks he can beat the laughter out of them. He even hit a boy in school the other day. He doesn't know they're laughing harder than ever. He doesn't know they'll never stop." This time she couldn't hold back, and the tears came uncontrollably. Elizabeth got a terrible feeling as she listened to her friend. "This boy your brother hit," she asked. "What was his name?" "I don't know. What does it matter? He was just someone else laughing, someone else making fun." "Tony's still on trial in this town. He'll never be able to pay for what he did 2 years ago. They'll never let him." Elizabeth sat quietly with her arm around her friend's shoulders. It was clear Sophia was crying for her family as much as for herself. Finally, she stopped and sat up. She tried to explain, but the words came slowly. "He used to be so happy, so much fun. He used to be my best friend. He helped around the house, and whenever we get discouraged, he would tell us how everything would work out fine. He made us proud to be Rizzos." At first, Elizabeth didn't understand. "You mean your father, Sophia?" "No, Elizabeth. My father was never a real father to me. He never made me feel proud. I mean Tony. Tony the way he used to be before Papa left us. Sometimes, on a good day, I think maybe he'll change again. Maybe things will get better. But then he comes home with that fierce face and anger in his eyes. And then I get scared, Elizabeth. So scared I'll never get my brother back." Elizabeth was still. She knew Sophia was too proud to have told her all this before. She knew, too, that she couldn't hurt her friend again when, tears still glistening in her brown eyes, Sophia asked her to come home with her after school. "I need a friend to talk to tell me it's going to be all right. If you're there, working with me on the play, I'll believe it, Elizabeth. By myself, I'll give up." "Sure," Elizabeth told her, knowing she couldn't bring herself to play sick again. Even if it meant disobeying her parents, she had to visit the Rizzes that afternoon. "The two of us have a lot of work to do. We've got a play and a party to get ready." Chapter 9. Elizabeth found it harder and harder to obey her parents where Sophia was concerned. As much as she loved her mother and father and hated lying to them, she came to count on her after-school visits at the Rizzos. During the week before auditions, The two girls worked together almost every afternoon, and each visit made them closer friends than ever. If it wasn't for your help after these committee meetings, Sophia told Elizabeth the day before tryouts, I don't know how I would have managed to finish this last act. She brushed her brown hair back from her forehead and slipped her arm through her friend's. And now, I think we deserve a celebration. How about 2 orange Frosties at Casey's place? Mama told me I could use the Rizzo raffle money to treat you. Rizzo raffle? Elizabeth looked confused. Does your family run a contest? Sort of. Sophia's eyes were full of merriment. You see, all week long, Mama, Tony, and I put all of our change into the cookie jar in the kitchen. Every Saturday, we each try to guess how much is in the jar. Whoever comes closest picks our Sunday trip. She smiled. If there's not much in the jar, we may just buy marshmallows and toast them on the beach. Once, when we had a lot, we took a bus ride to the aquarium. Elizabeth thought the Rizzo's contest was a wonderful idea. Maybe we could start a Wakefield Wheel of Fortune at home, she said. The only trouble is, Stephen would always pick the same prize, a round trip for one to Guido's Pizza Palace. Your brother sounds funny, Sophia said. Suddenly, her smile faded, and she turned serious. I wish Tony would laugh the way he used to. Lately, he doesn't seem to have any sense of humor at all. Maybe Stephen could teach him something. Well, maybe, Elizabeth answered, then quickly changed the subject. But let's not use the Rizzo raffle money for Frosties. Let's make our own right here at your house. Elizabeth didn't want Sophia to spend her money at Casey's. And, just as important, she didn't want Jessica or any of the unicorns to spot them at the popular after-school hangout. Elizabeth wasn't sure what would happen if word got back to her parents. Okay, Sophia smiled and led the way into the Rizzo's tiny kitchen. I know a terrific recipe for lemon slush. Breathing a sigh of relief, Elizabeth set to work. Soon Mrs. Rizzo joined them, and all three bustled around the room, crushing ice, getting glasses, and preparing a tray to take into the living room. When they had settled around the old trunk Mrs. Rizzo used as a coffee table, the play was on everyone's mind. Even though her English wasn't very good, Sophia's mother was full of questions about Sophia's drama. I have heard only bits and pieces so far, she explained to them. What is this fine play all about? Sophia hugged her mother. This fine play is about us, Mama. Us? Mrs. Rizzo looked surprised and a little worried. You mean you and me? And Tony? Not exactly, Mama. It's about a family. Anybody's family. Everybody's family. We call it straight talk, Mrs. Rizzo, Elizabeth volunteered. Everyone on the committee got so excited about Sophia's ideas, we decided to make the play about one family, a family everyone could understand. There's a mother, a father, 2 sisters, and a son. Even some next-door neighbors and friends, added Sophia. Once we got started, it was hard to stop. Her face was brightened by the enthusiastic smile Elizabeth had come to love. Now we've got so many parts in the play, Mr. Bowman thinks we should invite the high school drama club to come to tryouts. He's afraid that even 8th graders might be too young for the parents' roles. I hope he doesn't ask the older students to come, added Elizabeth. I want this to be our play, and I think we have plenty of kids who could play those parts. If they haven't been talked out of trying out. Sophia's look was enough to remind Elizabeth that her own twin was trying to sabotage the play. What do you mean? Mrs. Rizzo asked. Why wouldn't they want to try out for the play? Elizabeth stirred her lemon slush and tried to explain things as gently as she could. I think a lot of kids still want a slick Broadway play about some fantastic dream world. She winked at Sophia. Not everyone wants to take a good close look at the world they really live in. Well, Mrs. Rizzo concluded, rising slowly to take the pitcher back to the kitchen, if we are ever going to make dreams come true, the only way is to start with what we've got. She smiled broadly at the 2 girls. And we've got quite a lot, right? You just wait until tomorrow. When you read them your play, those kids will be fighting for a chance to be part of it, Sophia. Elizabeth saw the pride in Mrs. Rizzo's eyes. She knew that play or no play Sophia already had all the applause she needed at home. Still, she told herself, it would be wonderful if the play committee could present their work to a big, enthusiastic crowd of actors. But it didn't happen. Just as Elizabeth and Sophia feared, Jessica and the unicorns had spread the word. There were only a handful of students waiting in the auditorium after school the next day. Mr. Bowman, who had helped Peter Jeffries run off posters to announce the tryouts, was perplexed. "Didn't you put up the announcements we wrote, Peter?" he asked. "I sure did, Mr. Bowman. Mary and I put them everywhere we could think of." Peter, who had probably heard about Leela's audition from Bruce Patman, looked unhappy and embarrassed. I'm really sorry, Sophia," he said, sounding as if he were to blame. "That's okay," said Sophia. Elizabeth could tell from the way her voice trembled that she was hurt. "I guess there were a lot of other meetings today." Mary Robinson, who knew what the unicorns had been up to, couldn't bear to see the work all of them had done for weeks wasted. "I think it's terrible." She turned away from the stage and looked behind the front row of chairs where the committee sat. There were no more than 10 boys and girls in the nearly empty gym. "What are we going to do? We have more parts than players." "No, we don't." Nort seemed to surprise even himself by taking things firmly in hand. "Just because we haven't got enough people here doesn't mean there aren't enough in the school." He no longer sounded shy and retiring. "I think we should go ahead and cast a few roles today and then give a reading next week during English class." Mr. Bowman agreed that scheduling readings during each class he taught would be an excellent way to recruit more actors. "1 or 2 key scenes should be enough to convince your classmates this is a fine play," he told them. "We can cast some of the parts today, as Northrop suggests, and use committee members to read the rest." "Great!" Peter was smiling and already full of optimism again. "Once they hear this play read right, everybody will want a part. In fact," he added, smiling at Sophia, "there's a part I'd like to try out for." "Me too," admitted Lisa Rainish. "And, if you don't mind me saying so, Sophia, I think you'd be terrific as Randy, the eldest daughter." "I'll read Randy," Sophia offered shyly, "if Elizabeth reads her sister." Suddenly the room was alive with enthusiasm and activity. Mr. Bowman called the names of the students who wanted to audition in alphabetical order. One by one, they walked up on stage to read from the play's final act, the scene Leela had made such fun of the week before. But how different this reading was! Without Leela's dramatics, the characters sprang to life, and the situation seemed so close to home. The scene brought all the members of the play's family together on stage at once. At first, the dialogue featured some realistic and funny arguments between the parents and their children. Suddenly, toward the end of the scene, there was a surprising tender moment when everyone realized how little they had been saying to one another. Then they all promised to talk straight, to say what was on their minds. It wasn't a happily ever after fairy tale ending, but it was the sort of finale this honest, truthful play seemed to call for. Apparently everyone listening agreed, because when Caroline Pierce, playing the mother, read the final line, everyone in the room burst into spontaneous applause. Elizabeth realized happily that Mrs. Rizzo wasn't going to be Sophia's only fan. The students who had come to audition were as proud of the play as the committee that had written it. Everyone was so anxious to talk about the story and characters that it wasn't until 2 hours later that Mr. Bowman was able to dismiss the actors and call the casting meeting to order. "I think we got a good start in building our stage family today," Mr. Bowman told the committee. He agreed with the others that Caroline, Sweet Valley Middle School's resident gossip, made an excellent mother. Caroline's prissy attitude seemed perfect. "There's no need to bring in high school students with local talent like that," their teacher assured them. "There will be a lot more talent to choose from after we read some scenes in English class," Northrop added. "I only hope we'll be able to recruit someone good for the father's character. We didn't really see anyone who could handle it today." "That's right," agreed Lisa. "But," she added, looking with open admiration at Peter, "we did find a terrific brother." The hearty cheers of the other committee members made the decision unanimous. Peter had surprised them all. His reading had been one of the best they'd heard. "Thanks," he told them, blushing. "I think we've made real progress so far," announced Mr. Bowman. "I also think we uncovered more than one new talent this afternoon." He glanced at Sophia, then addressed the entire group.
I'm not sure it's fair that one person have so many gifts, but I am sure it wouldn't be fair to our show if anyone else but Sophia played Randy." Now the applause was amazing. The students clapped until their hands ached. Gentle, shy Sophia had proven herself one of the finest actresses they had seen. Smiling and proud, Sophia accepted their applause and then made a few suggestions about changing the last scene. Something in the lines had bothered her, and she wanted the scene to be perfect for the readings the next week. "If it's okay with you," she told the others, "I think Elizabeth and I can get it patched up. When she reads to me, I can feel what's right and what's not." "When she reads, it sounds great to me," Peter told them. "In fact, I think Elizabeth should play your sister. You two are perfect together." Again, the committee was in agreement. Even Lisa, who had hoped for the sisters' part herself, admitted that there was a wonderful interplay between the two girls. "Yes," she said, "they sure do sound like real friends." "Well," said Elizabeth, "I'm afraid that's not because I'm a good actress. It's just because we really are friends." The next week was a busy one for the committee and for Mr. Bowman. On Monday, every English class featured a brief reading from Straight Talk by Sophia Rizzo. Even though the committee had helped revise and rewrite Sophia's material, they all agreed she deserved credit as the writer. Just as Peter had predicted, by Tuesday there were more than enough students clamoring for parts. The biggest surprise of all, everyone admitted, came when Bruce Patman tried out for the role of the father. "Wow!" exclaimed Northrop, leaning toward the other committee members. "Isn't he great?" Elizabeth, suspecting that someone had urged Bruce's involvement, turned to Peter. "With a little help from our friends," she said, smiling, "this play is really shaping up." Peter smiled back. "I just thought it would be a shame to waste Bruce's natural talents," Peter told them. "After all, he loves telling everyone what to do. I thought he'd make a great parent." When Elizabeth got home that afternoon, she found her twin fuming. "Why is everyone making such a big fuss over this dumb play?" Jessica exclaimed, looking up from her nails. Elizabeth noticed that she had painted them pink and had glued a tiny, sparkling sticker at the top of each. "Just what is so great about a whole lot of boring words strung together without a single song or dance?" "I think the fuss is about something pretty different and pretty special, Jess," Elizabeth explained, sitting on her sister's bed. "I sure wish you had tried out, but I'm glad at least one of us will get to watch it." "Sorry, big sister." Jessica began to wave her hands in order to dry her nails. "I have no intention of attending that play. I'm going to be much too busy getting ready for my trip." "But everyone's coming," Elizabeth told her, knowing how her sister hated being left out. "Even Leela told me she decided to come and watch Bruce and Peter." "Count me out," Jessica said with a pout. "I'd rather die. There's positively no way I'm going. There is absolutely and completely nothing anyone can do or say to drag me to Sophia's play." "What if someone were to tell you she wasn't going to switch places with you for the trip?" Elizabeth suggested shrewdly. "Elizabeth Wakefield, that's not fair." "Well, it's not fair for you to be so mean to Sophia when everyone else has decided to give her a chance." Elizabeth smiled, looking almost as crafty as Jessica did when she was hatching a new scheme. "And I suppose that since you won't be switching places with me, you won't want to take my new shoes to Los Angeles with you." "You mean those little white pumps?" Jessica's eyes lit up. "Yep," Elizabeth grinned and waited. "Well," Jessica considered slowly, "maybe I could drop by the night of the play. I mean, just to take a tiny peek." Chapter 10. As the night of the play approached, Elizabeth saw less and less of her family. Except for the day that Stephen's basketball team won their league championship and they all celebrated at Casey's together, Elizabeth was seldom home. Rehearsal started after supper and lasted until bedtime. That meant that she usually fell into bed, too exhausted for even a nighttime chat with her twin. After a while, Jessica gave up opening her sister's door and trying to share the latest gossip. But Jessica never dreamed just how busy her sister really was. As the night of the play got closer, so did Sophia's birthday. And, for Sophia at least, the party was as important as her stage debut. "Oh, Elizabeth," she said, as the two drew a funny imitation for each guest, "now that I know the kids in the committee and in the cast, I have real friends to invite to my first real birthday party." She looked at Elizabeth, her smile coming easily now. "You said things would change, and they have. How can I ever thank you?" By having a terrific time at our party, of course, Elizabeth told her, wishing more than anything that she could tell her parents about it. It made her feel guilty to be in a play about honesty at school, but not to be able to level with her folks at home. Still, as the big day approached, she didn't dare risk Sophia's dream by telling them. What if they forbade her to have the party? How could she ever face Sophia again? So the invitations were mailed, the last days of rehearsal passed, and before she knew it, Elizabeth was standing backstage on the night of the performance. Fortunately, Jessica had kept her promise. As Elizabeth peeked out from behind the curtains, she saw her family seated in the second row of the auditorium. "Everyone's out there," she whispered to the rest of the cast. "It's a full house." "Don't tell me about it," wailed Sophia, looking pale. Elizabeth touched her friend's shoulder gently as they watched more people file into the crowded auditorium. "Hey, don't you dare worry. Everything's going to be fine." "But I've never acted in public before." She began to pace. "What if I forget my lines? What if I get sick right on stage?" Elizabeth had to admit that her stomach, too, was doing flip-flops. As she studied the sea of faces in the audience, she almost wished the unicorns hadn't gone back on their threat to boycott the play. She knew the play was good, but what if they weren't as good as they had been in rehearsal? "My dad says all great performers get stage fright," she told Sophia, "just like horses before a big race." Elizabeth loved horses and had read lots of books about them. They whinny and jump against their stalls, but then, once the race starts, there's no stopping them. Elizabeth was right. Even though she seemed nervous and unsure of herself backstage, something happened to Sophia when she played her part in front of the audience. Just as she had at auditions and rehearsals, she made everyone believe in Randy. The world she had written about came to life on the stage, and it was clear that the audience could hardly take its eyes off Sophia as her story unfolded. And she wasn't the only one. Everyone performed beautifully, and as the cast lined up backstage for the curtain call, they all felt the tingling excitement of a job well done. Holding their breath, Elizabeth and the others who played smaller parts held hands and walked on stage. Immediately, they were greeted with roars of approval and hearty applause. Next, it was time for Caroline and Bruce, the mother and father, to take their bows. As they joined the others standing in front of them, even louder applause was heard. Elizabeth saw Bruce's smile as he bent from the waist, just low enough to keep an eye on the audience and relish the reaction. Finally, it was Peter and Sophia's turn. As they strode onto the stage and stood in front of the cast, the auditorium seemed to go wild. Elizabeth looked at her family in the second row. The Wakefields were applauding with the rest. Their broad smiles told Elizabeth that her parents' feelings about the Rizzos hadn't kept them from enjoying the show. Even Jessica, Elizabeth noticed, was clapping heartily. Sitting beside Stephen, her twin laughed when their brother put his fingers to his mouth and let out a piercing whistle. Then the most special moment in the evening happened. As Sophia stepped back and joined the cast, a man at the back of the room stood up and yelled, "Author! Author!" Soon others in the auditorium were on their feet too. "Author!" The cry sounded louder and louder. "Author! Author!" Mr. Bowman whispered from off stage, smiling, "You'll have to take another bow, Sophia. Go on, you've earned it." Sophia, overwhelmed, stood still where she was. Peter and Bruce, however, acted quickly. Standing on each side of her, they took her arms and gently walked her forward once more to center stage. Now the entire audience was on its feet, and the applause was like an ocean's roar washing across the glorious night. Later, just before she drifted to sleep, Elizabeth reviewed the day's events. So much seemed to have changed. Sophia had won the respect and admiration of the same boys and girls who had teased her all year long. On the ride home from the play, Stephen, whose black eye had healed, decided he shouldn't have judged Sophia so harshly just because of her brother. "I guess," he had said, "that she packs a punch too, but in a pretty good way." "You won't get an argument on that from us," Mr. Wakefield had said. "You were right about one thing, Elizabeth. Sophia has a lot of talent." "I was close to tears during that last scene," their mother had remarked. "How about you, Jessica? Didn't you enjoy it?" "I still say she dresses like a toad," Jessica had grumbled from the back seat beside Elizabeth. Then, her blonde head tossing impatiently, she added, "But I guess anyone who can write and act like that can dress any way she wants." Elizabeth had leaned over and hugged her sister. It had made her happiest of all that Jessica, the one person who meant more to her than anyone, could admit she'd been wrong. Snug in her bed, Elizabeth savored the wonderful feelings. Things seemed to have gone so well that she wondered if she should tell her parents about the birthday party the next day. They had been moved by Sophia's play. Didn't that mean they'd be willing to reconsider their request that Elizabeth stop seeing Sophia? Maybe she should ask their permission to give the party. But, she decided as she dozed off, why take a chance? She would have to explain about the switch and might ruin Jessica's chance for her dream trip. No, it was best to go ahead with her plans, even though she felt like a sneak. She would make up for it the following week by explaining everything. Next morning, Elizabeth woke to the sound of Jessica's hairdryer. She looked at her clock radio. It was 10 o'clock. Her mother and father had left for the beach 2 hours earlier, and Stephen was supposed to meet his team at 9. The Martins were due to pick up Elizabeth any minute. Sleepy, but still feeling proud and happy from the night before, Elizabeth stumbled into Jessica's room to see if she could help. "It's a good thing the Martins don't know us too well," she joked, "or those suitcases would be a dead giveaway." Elizabeth was a careful traveler, and her family marveled that she could fit what she needed for the longest trips into a single overnight bag. The secret, she often told Jessica, was organization and advanced planning. But Jessica didn't follow her sister's advice. Today, Jessica's 3 suitcases bulged and overflowed with enough clothes to last several people for a week. "I think it's going to take both of us to close this one," Elizabeth said, smiling. She walked to a large open case that was filled to the top and over. She examined the clothes her sister had packed. "Jess, do you really need to take 4 pairs of shoes?" "Of course," insisted her twin, turning off the dryer and joining Elizabeth next to the yawning suitcase. "What if I change my mood when I get there? Or what if the Martin's daughter is not dressing up? Or if it rains? Liz, I've simply got to be ready for anything." "Well, you better be ready quickly, because that sounds like a car in the driveway right now." Sure enough, when they raced to the window to look down at the driveway, both girls saw a black limousine pulling up to the house. "Oh, goodness, I'm not ready. You've got to stall them, Liz." Jessica began racing wildly around her bedroom, snatching up a hairbrush and barrettes. "Oh, whoever thought they'd be early?" Elizabeth continued to watch from the window as an elegantly dressed woman and a girl about the twins' age stepped from the car. The girl had short dark hair and was dressed in a stunning glazed cotton sundress and jacket. "It's a good thing Jessica's going instead of me," Elizabeth thought as she studied the girl's stiff, snobbish expression. "She has a lot more patience with spoiled brats than I do." The doorbell rang and Jessica sat down on the last suitcase, hoping her weight would force it closed. As the doorbell rang again, Elizabeth hopped on the suitcase beside her sister. Together they succeeded in getting the lid closed and locked. Then Elizabeth raced down to the door while Jessica gave one last look around her room to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything. She spotted her cast album and remembered she wanted Terence Wesley to autograph it. She dashed to her night table and grabbed the album. Finally, glancing at the giant shout poster over her bed, she blew a kiss in its direction. "Goodbye for now, Terence," she whispered. "See you soon." When Jessica reached the foot of the stairs, Mrs. Martin, her daughter, and their driver had joined Elizabeth in the living room. "And this is my sister, Elizabeth," Jessica heard her twin announce. She greeted the 2 visitors, feeling her excitement rise as she noticed the beautiful clothes they were wearing. "This is going to be an absolutely perfect weekend," Jessica told herself, "if I can just remember that my name is Elizabeth." Mrs. Martin explained that her husband was waiting in the car and that they had to hurry. The driver helped the girls get Jessica's luggage, and then, after Elizabeth gave her sister a quick kiss goodbye, the limousine headed out the drive. Elizabeth stood, waving at the tiny silhouette in the back seat until the car pulled out of sight. She hoped the trip would be special. Elizabeth stood alone in front of the house for only a minute before she remembered there was no time to lose. She had already alerted Amy and Julie, and they were waiting for the phone call that would mean they could rush over to start decorating for Sophia's party. "The coast is clear," she told Amy when she answered her phone. "Operation Birthday is ready to roll." After she had called Julie, Elizabeth set to work herself. She had only a few hours, she reminded herself, to bake a cake and shop for enough food to feed the cast. Stephen would be gone all day, and her parents weren't due back until after dinner. Her brother had promised to tell them that Elizabeth had gotten safely off on her trip and that Jessica had been so lonely and depressed she'd gone to Leila Fowler's house to spend the night. Elizabeth would spend the night with Amy after the party. The party had to be over and all evidence cleaned up by 6 o'clock. Once Amy and Julie arrived and all three girls were busy hanging festive streamers of turquoise and pink crepe paper across the dining room, Elizabeth felt glad she had offered to host Sophia's party. Quickly the room was transformed into a magic place, fit for a special celebration. Along one side, the girls arranged party hats and silly noisemakers. The hats were all pointed clown hats except for Sophia's. She deserves to be treated like a real princess for once, she thought to herself, as she placed a silver foil tiara in the center of the row of hats. Along the other side of the room was a long table lined with plates and trays. Soon these dishes were heaped with donuts, pretzels, and taco shells and fixings. Tall pitchers waited to be filled with soda, juice, and of course, lemon slush. Best of all was the cake. Elizabeth and Julie worked hard on the finishing touches. Finally, they brought it in for Amy to inspect. "Ooh," she exclaimed, "it's just beautiful." On the cake's top, in chocolate and strawberry frosting, Julie had sketched a stage complete with billowing pink curtains. Between the curtains, Elizabeth had written in cherry frosting, "Happy Birthday, Sophia." As she studied their handiwork, Elizabeth knew all the plotting and planning had been worth it. She could just picture Sophia's face when she saw the beautiful room. Amy seemed to understand how she felt. "This is going to be a new start for a new friend," she announced, glancing with satisfaction around the gaily decorated room. "I'm sure your mom and dad would understand." "I hope so," Elizabeth told her. But as the doorbell rang and the first guests began to arrive, Elizabeth felt a twinge of guilt. After all, this was the first party either twin had ever given without their parents' permission. Even Jessica had never done anything so sneaky. Chapter 11. While Elizabeth and her crew were hard at work, her parents were in their car, heading back to Sweet Valley. A sudden storm had changed their plans and forced the boat party back to dry land. As the car wound down the shore highway, Mrs. Wakefield remembered how disappointed Jessica was when Elizabeth had been chosen to go with the Martins. "I know we did the right thing by sending Elizabeth to L.A., Ned," she told her husband. "Still, I felt awful about leaving Jessica alone today with nothing to do. I'm glad we'll have a chance to make it up to her." "It was lucky the Sloane's children invited that group of teenagers over," said Mr. Wakefield. "I think bringing Jessica back to the party with us is just what the doctor ordered." "You're right, honey. There's nothing Jessica enjoys more than a party, and now we can all spend the day together." As they approached the downtown area and turned toward Sweet Valley's residential section, both Mr. and Mrs. Wakefield were thinking that things usually had a way of working out for the best. That wasn't at all what Elizabeth was thinking as she watched guest after guest come into the house. She had deliberately invited just a few people so that Sophia's party could be a secret from her parents. But now came not only the cast members who had been invited, but dozens of boys and girls who suddenly wanted to be Sophia's friends. "Where's the birthday girl?" asked Leila Fowler, brushing past Amy and joining the crowd in the dining room. She was wearing a purple flared skirt and matching soft knit sweater. She carried a box wrapped in a bright purple paper and ribbon that Elizabeth was sure she had picked to match her outfit. "The Rizzos don't have a car," explained Elizabeth. She looked pointedly at Leila, who had probably been dropped off by her father's chauffeur. "She should be here in a few minutes." "Say," said Peter, "that'll give us time to hide." He smiled apologetically at his hostess. "I know it's kind of corny, Liz, but since Sophia's never really had a birthday, I thought, well..." "I think it's a great idea, Peter. Okay, everyone, find a place to make yourselves invisible, and when we open the door, let's hear the biggest happy birthday cheer ever." Instantly, the Wakefield house was alive with activity.
as over 40 kids scrambled for hiding places behind the sofa and chairs in the living room, in back of the buffet in the dining room, even wedged between the coat rack and table in the hall. Watching everyone run for cover, Elizabeth wondered what had happened to the quiet party she'd planned. "Where did they all come from?" she asked. "I told the cast to keep our party quiet, but it looks like word leaked out."
"Gushed out is more like it," commented Amy. "I think everyone sort of feels they discovered Sophia last night. I hope she doesn't mind so many people hogging her limelight."
"If I know Sophia," Elizabeth assured her, "she'll be only too glad to share her success with so many friends. In fact, today may mean even more to her than last night." When the doorbell rang a few minutes later, Amy hushed the crowd.
"Okay," she told them, "everyone in the world is here except Sophia. That must be our birthday girl, so stay out of sight."
Everyone ducked, and cries of "quiet" and "shh" sounded. Exchanging grins, Elizabeth, Amy, and Julie raced to answer the door. Then, as the crowd of guests roared, "Happy birthday!" everyone stood up in time to see a very surprised Mr. and Mrs. Wakefield walk into the hall. Elizabeth stared in disbelief at her parents. All her plans had been so careful. She thought of everything except the possibility of her parents coming home early. What are you doing here?" she asked before she could stop herself.
"We might ask you the same thing, young lady." Mr. Wakefield stared at the crowd of embarrassed, silent children. "What on earth is going on?" "Why aren't you in L.A.?" Mrs. Wakefield asked. "Where's Jessica? We came to take her back to the party with us."
Elizabeth felt numb. Tears filled her eyes as she tried to explain. Jessica wanted to go to L.A. so badly, she told them. She was the one who really deserved that trip. So we switched places. But it was all my idea, honest. She could hardly look at her parents. Her words tumbled out as she tried to make them see how important the party was for Sophia. "I never meant to lie to you. Oh, Mom, Dad, I just wanted to give her a real birthday party, her first one ever." Through her tears, she saw all the kids in the room watching her. Her face felt hot as a blush crept into her cheeks. "I promised Sophia a party long before you told me I couldn't see her, and I just couldn't break my promise. I had to show her someone cares. She's never done anything to hurt anyone. I was going to tell you, but things got so complicated so fast. They just kept getting worse and worse."
"Please, Mr. and Mrs. Wakefield, we're so sorry," said Amy. "We'll clean up this mess right away. Before you know it, everything will be just the way it was."
Before Elizabeth's parents could say a word, everyone went to work, taking down decorations and returning food to the kitchen. But only a few bowls had been put in the refrigerator and a single streamer torn from the ceiling when the doorbell rang again. The guests held their breath as Mrs. Wakefield opened the door and Sophia Rizzo walked in. When she saw the crowd of guests and the colorful decorations, Sophia's face lit up into a dazzling smile. "Oh," she gasped, as if she had walked into a fairy tale. She looked from one face to another, and then from the sideboard heaped with party hats to the table covered with food. "Wow!" But as her eyes met Elizabeth's, she realized something was dreadfully wrong. "What is it?" she asked, going immediately to her friend's side. This was without a doubt the most awful day in Elizabeth's life, and the worst was still ahead. It was bad enough to confess in front of all her friends what a horrible mess she'd made of everything. It was bad enough to think that her parents might never trust her again. But now she knew she would have to call off the party and ruin everything for Sophia. Her voice hardly above a whisper, she said to her friend, I have something to tell you."
"We all have something to tell you, Sophia," Mr. Wakefield interrupted. Then, smiling at his wife, he asked her, "Don't we, honey?"
"We sure do," Mrs. Wakefield agreed. She moved toward the guest of honor, putting her arm around her. "Happy birthday, Sophia," she said. Elizabeth could hardly believe her ears. "But I thought you said—"
"What we said was wrong," her father explained. "If there's one thing we all learned from Sophia's play, it's that everyone makes mistakes, grown-ups as well as kids."
"Not that you didn't make a pretty big one yourself, Elizabeth Wakefield," added her mother. "Next time I hope you'll trust your parents enough to let them in on your plans." She smiled just enough to let Elizabeth know she was forgiven, but not entirely off the hook. Even though she knew there was probably a well-deserved punishment in store, Elizabeth felt wonderful. Her parents weren't going to punish Sophia for Elizabeth's mistake. In fact, thanks to her father, it looked as if the Rizzos were about to get a second chance. "Why don't we make this a family affair?" Mr. Wakefield asked Sophia. "I could drive over and pick up your mother." He paused and looked at Elizabeth, who smiled back gratefully. "And your brother, too, if he'd care to join us." Surrounded by more friends than she had ever dreamed of, Sophia could only smile and nod happily. It was Elizabeth who answered for her. "That would be wonderful," she told her father. And, as she watched him wave to her friends and head for the door, she felt warm all over just to know that she had such a kind, understanding man for her dad. Elizabeth knew why her father was driving to the Rizzos. It was his way of showing her that he intended to check things out, to make up his own mind without listening to gossip and rumors. And once he had met Mrs. Rizzo and gotten to know Sophia, she knew things would be set straight. Sure enough, a half-hour later, just as Sophia was cutting her birthday cake, Mr. Wakefield walked in, accompanied by Mrs. Rizzo. Sophia, who had her back to the door and didn't see them come in, was intent on avoiding the pink iced curtains Julie had worked so hard on. "I can't bear to cut them," she confessed. "I don't want the curtains to close on this day, ever." "I don't blame you a bit," Mrs. Rizzo said, stepping up to hug her. "And if I wore a crown like that, I would never want to take it off." Sophia was indeed wearing the pretty little tiara Elizabeth had bought for her. Turning, she smiled at her mother. "Mama, look!" She whirled around with delight, modeling the crown. "Have you ever seen such a big head in your life? This crown is going to pop right off if I get any happier." "Your head is not so big, Sophia," her mother told her. "You deserve it all, everything." Small and shy among the guests, Mrs. Rizzo blushed and hugged her daughter again. "Tony, he didn't come, but he feels just the same. Really he does, Sophia." A shadow crossed Sophia's face for a minute, but then passed like a cloud in the wind. "I know he does, Mama," she whispered. "I know he does." As happy at Sophia's triumph as if it had been her own, Elizabeth grabbed a cup and raised it high in the air. "And now," she announced, giggling in spite of herself, "I'd like to propose a toast." Laughing and jostling one another to get closer, her schoolmates gathered around her. "What are we drinking to, Elizabeth?" Caroline Pierce asked, her cup poised. Elizabeth looked at her parents and at the ring of smiling faces around her. Finally, she caught Sophia's eye and winked. She remembered the secret picnic, the committee meetings, and her afternoons at the Rizzo home. "To friends," she said, grinning broadly around the room, "to times we'll never forget." Next, it was time for Sophia to open her presents. And what presents they were! One of the guests had placed the play program in a metal frame engraved with the date and Sophia's name. Bruce Patman presented her with a neatly wrapped videotape of the entire production. "That's just a copy," he confessed. "My dad insisted on keeping the original for himself. You can come over and watch it whenever you want to." "Well, my present has nothing to do with the play," said Leela Fowler, "but you have to open it before I explode." Leela did indeed look as if she couldn't wait until Sophia opened the purple package. She handed it with great ceremony to the guest of honor. Elizabeth eyed the package suspiciously, but Sophia was too happy to hold a grudge. Shyly, she whispered her thanks and took the present on her lap. When she had opened the box, she lifted a beautiful purple sweater from the tissue. It was nearly identical to the one Leela herself was wearing. "I thought that as long as you're going to be famous," Leela told her, "you might as well dress like someone important." Even though Leela's conceited remark would have made most people laugh, Sophia was too busy gazing at the beautiful sweater to do anything but smile. "And now, if you don't mind, a present that you can't open," Mrs. Wakefield announced. "We have some good news." Looking as if she could hardly bear to keep her secret a minute more, she begged Mrs. Rizzo to join her. Elizabeth's mother's eyes were dancing with excitement. "It seems that Mrs. Rizzo here is as talented as her daughter, in a different field. In Italy, she had her own shop, where she designed quilts and afghans." Mrs. Rizzo smiled shyly. "But dear, I have a problem with my English and with my legs." She dropped her eyes, but then raised them again, her face full of hope. "Mrs. Wakefield says her firm can use my pillows and rugs that I can design for them at home."
It's true, Elizabeth's mother told them. In fact, I'll bet to develop a talent like this, my firm would even be willing to help finance an English course. It would certainly be a good investment in our future. And in ours, too, Mrs. Rizzo smiled broadly, her arms tight around Sophia. When somebody believes in you, it is easy to do good, eh, Sophia? Sophia, still wearing her tiara, gazed fondly at Elizabeth. You bet, Mamma, she said. When you've got a friend who cares about you, who encourages you and stands by you, you've got everything you need to succeed. Maybe that's true for all of us, Sophia. Mr. Wakefield pulled Elizabeth's friend aside to share a surprise of his own with her. Your brother wasn't ready to face a crowd like this today, but while I was at your house, I gave him the name of a friend of mine. He's a psychologist who works with youngsters at the Valley Family Counseling Center. Mr. Wakefield's smile was warm and reassuring. He's helped a lot of confused children, and I think Tony would like him. Sophia's happiness had been building, but now that Elizabeth's father had offered her hope that her brother might overcome his anger and frustration, the dam broke. Crying, she hugged Mr. Wakefield, as if she would never let go. Oh, thank you, she sobbed. Thank you for being such kind, wonderful people. Thank you for helping me and my mother and Tony. But most of all, she continued, as she grabbed Elizabeth's hand, thank you for giving me the best friend I've ever had. Minutes before, Elizabeth had been convinced that this party marked the worst moment of her life. Now, with Sophia's thanks ringing in her ears and her family and friends around her, she wondered if she had ever had a happier day. The only thing that would have made it all perfect, of course, would have been to share the party with Jessica. But, as Elizabeth learned when her twin returned the next day, Jessica wouldn't have traded places for anything. I'm glad everything worked out for Sophia, Lizzie, she confided while she unpacked her 3 bulging suitcases. But I wouldn't have missed Shout for all the birthday parties in the world. Jessica began to glide gracefully around her bedroom with an imaginary dance partner. Oh, Terence, she whispered, her eyes half closed. Being with you was positively the greatest experience of my life. Then she opened her eyes and winked at her sister from across the room. Terence says he's sure Sophia's play was okay, but he and I know there's just nothing like singing and dancing. Elizabeth hated to spoil her sister's happy mood, but she decided she'd better fill Jessica in on what her father had told her after the party. Dad wasn't so happy about the switch we pulled. He said we should both expect a punishment to suit the crime. What does that mean? Jessica asked, stopping herself in the middle of a pirouette. I'm not sure, Elizabeth confessed. He said he would take our good intentions into account, and that sometimes people break the rules for a good reason. Great, that means we're off the hook. Maybe not, Elizabeth cautioned. You know Dad. He always means what he says. We did fool the Martins, and I did give Sophia's party without telling them. That's right! Jessica stopped dancing and plopped into her bed. You broke twice as many rules as I did, so you should get the worst punishment. Fair's fair, Lizzie, right? Suddenly, though, she looked stricken. Oh, no! What if he grounds us? If he does, Elizabeth admitted, it won't be the first time. But he can't. He simply can't. It would spoil everything all over again. What do you mean, Jess? Elizabeth saw that her sister was genuinely upset. Didn't I tell you? A smile replaced her frown as she remembered her good news. Mr. Butler wants me to head the mini-Olympics. Oh, Jessica, that's wonderful, Elizabeth exclaimed. Yeah, provided Dad doesn't come down too hard. This year's Olympics are going to feature the biggest, toughest, best races ever. She grinned at her sister, a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. Why, blubbery old Lois Waller will be up to her fat ankles in sweat. What do you mean? Elizabeth asked suspiciously. The Olympics aren't just for jocks, Jess. Everyone should have a fair chance to win. Not the way I see it, big sister. If people haven't taken the time to get in shape, then I don't think they should expect to win any prizes. And for once, what I think goes. Don't forget, I'm in charge. I know it, Elizabeth told her, wondering what would happen when Jessica planned one of the most important events in the whole school year. And I have a feeling that very soon everyone else will, too. Will anyone have a fair chance to compete against Jessica? Find out in one of the gang, Sweet Valley Twins, number 10.